to episode 21 of the Small Truck Campers podcast. I'm your host, Spencer Hayes. We are recording live here in the Six Pack Campers mobile podcast studio and community development center. This is the Small Truck Campers podcast. Thanks so much for joining me today. We got a great episode, and I'm excited to announce our guest. You've probably seen him on Instagram building out his rig, the Cream Puff, or maybe just tinkering in his awesome garage, which we're going to dive into. But for this episode, I am pleased to announce we'll be having on Joshua Martin of Martin's Making and Martin Shapes, and also of his build, the Cream Puff. So without any further ado, please welcome my guest, Josh Martin. Josh, thanks so much for taking the time, and I'm excited for this chat.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's cool to see your studio, or your workshop rather.
Yeah, this is where I spend most of my days.
You're in San Clemente or Dana Point?
Technically, it's Dana Point, but I'm in between. So I'm in Capistrano Beach, and
Okay.
Capistrano Beach was, what do you want to call it, annexed by the city of Dana Point years ago. But the people that are in Capistrano Beach are still we're still Capo Beach here. So
Nice. Were you able to check the surf today?
I did. I got back from a walk on the beach, and not much.
Yeah.
But it's Capo Beach in Doheny, so it's usually hard to tell unless we get a big south or something.
Yeah, Doheny, that's what we used to call it. Did you grow up down there, or where did you grow up precisely?
Yeah, I grew up right here in this neighborhood, but just literally a block and a half from here, right in Capo
Awesome.
Beach. Yeah, for sure.
And, I didn't know you had kids. You have two kids?
Yeah, I have two daughters. Yeah,
Wow.
I've got two daughters. Both of them are married. We got two granddaughters. And
Wow, congrats.
yeah, so I got a 4 and a 6-year-old granddaughter. And
Nice.
just built a tree house for them.
Saw that. Inspiring me to make one in my backyard.
Woo, yeah, it was fun. I built it all out of scrap. I didn't buy anything for it. I used an old ship mast I found for part of it, and all the wood it's all built out of, all the whole railing around it is all the same wood I used in the Cream Puff for the floor in there. I used the shell of the floor is Baltic birch, but then I actually put a hardwood floor in the camper.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, so that's Taylor Guitars. When they order wood for their necks, they'll get this Honduran mahogany or, from Brazil. I think they use a wood called sapele, which is a type of mahogany. They have it cut. Basically, it's like a 32-inch long piece that's roughly like a 4x4. And that's what they make their necks out of. But they always want to have a little bit extra. And when they don't want to have a piece too small. So they'll have these pieces that they cut off of those neck blanks that are like anywhere from 1/4 of an inch to 3/8 of an inch thick. And so they'll have these giant stacks of these neck blank offcuts. And a good friend of mine I make surfboards for, he's the CEO at Taylor. And so he called me one day and he's like, hey, I brought this stuff home and it's going to probably end up being firewood, but maybe you might want it. It's like, you want some of this wood? I go, sure. I drove down there and we loaded a full bed of my truck full of this mahogany. So I use it for all kinds of stuff. And the tree house is all this super killer mahogany.
Damn, dude.
Yeah, it's rad. Yeah.
That's rad, yeah.
Bugs don't like it. So they don't like the taste of it or something.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's hard. And I think I don't know, a lot of the tropical hardwoods, bugs don't like it. So
Yeah, makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Like tropical where all the bugs are, so they have to survive somehow, the trees.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Dang, man.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And obviously you're born into a surf family. How did you find surfing, or did surfing find you?
Yeah, I think I was 6 or 7 when my dad asked me if I wanted a surfboard. So he made me a surfboard. He was working at Hobie's at the time. And I learned to surf at Doheny. And yeah, I was, my uncle was also a surfboard shaper. My dad, I just had surfing all around me. One thing that was not a lot of people know is that my dad didn't surf. After, I think it was 1969, he broke his foot real bad, motorcycle racing. Surf's flat. Surfers would go ride motorcycles in the desert. And so he probably only surfed maybe half a dozen times that I got to surf with him after 1969. So he wasn't surfing a lot. If he hadn't broken his foot, I probably would have been in the water even sooner. Yeah.
So the injury was that bad? He couldn't stand, he couldn't surf, but he could shape and walk? I'm just curious what kind of injury. to
Yeah,
prevent you from doing that?
he broke the talus bone in his ankle,
Okay.
and that's basically the ball that your ankle hinges on, and the bone doesn't get a lot of blood flow. Um, Typically, at least back then, it's still a really serious injury today, even with new medical technology and all that. But he back then they would just fuse your ankle. They just stick a piece of bone in there and let it grow and fuse your ankle. And he asked the doctor, he said, "Hey, I ship surfboards. I'm on my feet all day. I can't have my ankle fused." The doctor said, "There's a really small chance it'll actually heal. You'll probably have to be off your foot for a year and a half." And so my dad asked him to put it in a cast at a 90-degree angle. His knee was bent 90 degrees, and he made a peg leg with a rest for his shin to sit on a balsa wood like rest with a peg leg that ran straight in line with his thigh. And that's how he shaped for a year and a half. Yeah, and eventually it did heal. The bone didn't die; it grew back and healed, but there was so much scar tissue in his ankle that the act of getting up on the surfboard, that flex, every time he'd go try to surf, he was in so much pain the next few days from it. He never went to rehab or anything, so he just felt like it wasn't worth risking work for surfing. So
Wow.
he just chose not to surf.
That's a big sacrifice.
He We spent a lot of time in the water though, so he just traded free diving, spearfishing, um, being on a boat, fishing, a lot of diving and fishing.
I feel like that's a pretty common trait amongst that generation, was shifting from surfing back more towards living off fishing and free diving. Uh, So I think that's in line with, I think, a lot of those kind of legends from that era, in my
Sure.
opinion. Obviously, he'd want to keep surfing, but switching it out, right?
Yeah, it was interesting. It wasn't like, I think the definition of surfing to him was much broader than what most people would most people would think of. It's just the act of riding a wave. Uh, Surfing was going surfing. It was, where are we going surfing? What are we driving to get there? What are we going to eat if we're hungry at the beach? How do we prepare for the trip? Even I don't know. My uncle, he would tell me stories about, he grew up and around Santa Monica, that area, and they would want to go down and surf in Tijuana or Rosarita Beach, Baja Malibu, that area. They go to K38. That was before the freeway, the 5 was in, so they drive the 1. It was a dark to dark adventure, to go do
Yeah.
that. So,
Is that Mickey Munoz?
yeah. So my mom's maiden name is Munoz. It's her brother. So,
That's incredible. I
talked to
think
Mickey yesterday.
no way.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
he's
so
doing good.
cool.
Still surfs every day.
Where does he live?
He's down in Baja on the East Cape.
I think I was in Hawaii a while back, and my buddy had like a 9/8 log,
Yeah.
and I'm pretty sure it was. I just remember the logo was
Oh
like one
yeah.
arm up, one arm down,
Yeah.
and
Quasimodo.
yeah, the
Yeah.
Quasimodo. I think that was a
Yeah.
Minos like nose rider. It works so good at queens and canoes. It's so fun. So that's
Yeah.
cool.
I have an original surfer magazine around here somewhere that it has all those poses he did.
It's so
Those came
funny.
from all those poses came from them going, when the surf was flat. They'd go down and watch bullfights at the Tijuana Bull Ring, and they were into the matadors, and the matadors had all these names for movements they do when they were fighting the bull, and so they would pretend they were bullfighters but just surfing, and they'd do their moves and name all these cool names. Yeah.
So your dad was into dirt biking, which like it kind of goes in line too with the whole like Bruce Brown thing on any Sunday. I
Yep.
think a lot of those dudes were into motorcycle riding if the surf was flat.
Steve McQueen hung around, Hobie, the Hoffmans, Mickey, my dad. Those guys were, and then there was Malcolm Smith. There were this tight knit group around here that did a lot of riding. So
Yeah. So growing up, and now I understand more of the history of kind of your lineage. Eventually, you start going to Mexico. What kind of activities were you into growing up besides surfing that maybe made you look over the horizon of San Juan Capistrano?
I spent all it's still, there's more development today than there was when I was a kid, but
Hmm.
I had hills I could ride a couple of blocks on my BMX bike and just be in the hills here behind San Juan and riding, catching snakes, lizards. I spent a lot of time fishing. I'd ride my bike down to Doheny, we called it Hole in the Fence at the time, ride through the state park there, go fish off the jetty. Got a job early on working on the sport fishing boats, cleaning. I was a cleanup kid. They'd
Nice.
come in after fishing, and I'd trade work for going out on the sport fishing boats out of Dana Point. So
Yeah. Yeah.
a lot of time with my dad diving, free diving. When I was real young, he'd go out in the water diving and at a place called Monarch Bay, just north of Salt Creek. And he'd leave me on the beach there, and I just would spend hours in the tide pools and just into all this. I actually made little fishing poles, and I found little tiny like salmon egg hooks for trout, and I would get mussels, and I'd spend the whole day at one of the biggest tide pools just catching the fish that were in the tide pools. And if you just scale your equipment down, 4-inch fish is like catching a tuna. So it's cool. That's amazing what lives, right at the edge of the ocean.
Yeah.
I go down and spend time fishing for corvina along the beach. I'm sure surfing, you've seen them. They'll eat sand crabs. They come up with a wave up the beach, like how grunion would. And you'll catch like, 3-4 pound fish that come up, almost on the
That's amazing.
sand. It's it's amazing how many people here live in Southern California, and they don't even get it. They just go to their office, they drive down the freeway every day, sit in traffic, and like it's a wild place here. There's adventure to be had. There's stuff to catch. There's wildlife. It's an awesome place. Most people don't appreciate it. My wife and I went camping a couple of weekends ago. We drove an hour and a half from here, from my house, and then we had as soon as we hit the dirt, it was an hour and a half of four low to get a. And we went from we're at sea level. I spent an hour and a half in four low and in the camper, and I'm up at 8,000 feet, and I can see Catalina, I can see San Clemente Island, I can see San Jacinto, Big Bear. I can see the mountains above Tecate in Mexico. I can see the Salton Sea, Borrego Springs, Palm Springs. I'm giving away a spot, but if somebody
Yeah.
can figure it
We got
out,
name
more
names.
power to
Yeah.
them. But you can. I mean, we've got San Clemente Island, Catalina. We've got the Channel Islands out here. You can be in the desert in 2 hours. You can literally snowboard or ski, surf, catch some snakes and lizards, go fishing all in one day. Yeah, I'd applied with the Coast Guard, and I got all the way to a point where it was like basically I just like sign on the dotted line.
Yeah.
My dad was in the Air Force, and he was just like, "No,
Okay.
son, I wouldn't go down this route." Yeah, yeah. My dad, he joined the reserves, Air Force Reserve. He didn't want to go to Vietnam, and so he joined the Air Force Reserve with a bunch of his surf buddies, and he went to boot camp and to just basic training stuff, and then I think the reserves was like I think it was a 2-year commitment or something like that.
Yeah.
At the time, and he had to do, I think it was 1 or 2 weekends a month,
Yep.
and then he had, I think it was
A
like
few
two
days a
weeks
year.
of active or something like that every year.
Yeah. Nothing's changed.
And yeah, and so he lived at Point Loma, and he had to check in for his weekends at Fort Rosecrans. That's where he would go in and do his. At the time, that's where even though it was I don't know why Air Force would check in there, but he had to go do his whatever his service on the
Sure.
weekends there.
Yeah.
And so he and his brother were in at the same time, and they would go sign in, and then they'd slip out of class or whatever they were doing, and they'd go grab their boards, and they'd walk down the trail to Ralph's,
No
and
way.
they would surf Ralph's. And he said, and Ralph's doesn't break all the time. And so he
Yeah.
said, if it wasn't breaking, we just spent the day on the beach at Ralph's, and we'd go dive for abalone and this and that. He goes, and we did that for a year and a half. Every weekend that we were on, we'd just
Heavy
go hang out at
surfing. Yeah.
Ralph's. Yeah. And so about a year and a half into it, he comes in there one day to sign in. Whoever's in charge goes, "Hey, Martin, come here." And he said, hey, you keep signing in, but I never see you. And, we caught you, this and that. We found you down on the beach the last time and this and that. We saw you down there. And, he goes, if I catch you down there one more time, you're going active and we're shipping you out of here. So,
That's so
yeah,
great.
the
Those are the good old
antics.
days. Good old
Yeah.
days when it was a
Man.
slap on the wrist.
He got one of his buddies, they wouldn't accept him because of his surfing bumps on his knees from knee paddling.
Big wins
And,
there.
yeah, it was a legit thing. He walked in, they go, what is that? He goes, those are my surfing bumps. And the doctor, the medic, or whoever was doing his physical, shot him with cortisone in one of them. And it
Oh,
swelled up all big, and he came in the next day hobbling in there. What'd you do to my knee? And they kicked him out. They were out of here.
get out of here. That is
Yeah,
so funny. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, everything I did sort of has brought me to where I'm at today, which is cool. Yeah. There was my uncle Mickey when he first moved down here from up in the Malibu, Santa Monica area.
Yeah.
This was in the late 60s, mid to late 60s. There was a pier that ran off the beach here at Capo Beach,
Wow.
right just south of Doheny. There was a big long wood pier that went out there. It was bigger than San Clemente Pier.
Okay.
And it was old, and I was part of the Capistrano Beach Club. And they just, I don't know, Orange County decided they needed to get rid of this pier. Whoever was in charge of this thing's condemned. And they put out a bid for contracts to get rid of the pier, demo it. And some coal miner from like Ohio or something got the contract, saw it in the newspaper or whatever, and bid on it. And so he knew dynamite and had a license to use dynamite and all that. But he was wearing, Oshkosh overalls, and he'd never seen the ocean before, So he
Yeah.
gets out here and he's like, what? This is a pier out here in the ocean. There's waves and sharks probably. And I'm not, I don't know about the water. But he had the contract to do it. So he put out the word, and somebody got a hold of Mickey, and they're like, there's potential for this job to work on blow up the pier. And Mickey was like, yeah, I'm good for that. So he went and applied for the job. And the guy says, you know anything about dynamite? Oh, I'm an expert with dynamite. He and Mickey Dora and stuff were building rockets on the beach up in, Malibu, and fireworks and stuff. And of course I know about dynamite, and he is a good diver. So he went out and set all the charges on the pier. And the guy showed him, okay, this is how you wire them all and everything. And they did the whole thing. They brought down the reported, Orange County Register and the newspaper. They had the cameras on the beach, and all the press is there. And they had the box with the T handle, and we're going to push this thing down, and the pier is going to blow up. Of course, Mickey wasn't allowed to push the handle down. It was the Ohio dude contractor. And so the guy pushes the handle down, and everybody, cameras are rolling and everything, and nothing happens. And the guy looks at Mickey. He's like, you blew it. There's a wire missing or something. You screwed up, And he goes, get in the water, go out there and find it. Go through all the wires, And Mickey's like, what if there's a delayed fuse or something? The guy says, all right, well, we'll wait 30 minutes, And so they waited for 30 minutes. He says, all right, get in the water. And so he went out there, and he found whatever he missed a wire or something, and plugged it in and came back in, and they blew the pier up. And yeah,
That's crazy.
I know. Yeah. And that would never happen these days. Oh,
No
man.
way. I love that. I can just
Yeah.
picture the Oshkosh guy with the overalls and like Mickey skinny and board shorts, like paddling out on his log with the mast that's like this. And
Yeah. Yeah. Go down. The water's like brown,
yeah, and just setting chart like that's
Yeah.
just so funny. I love that. That's that
I
American
know.
history that it's just so classic, and it's so cool to hear it passed down through
Yeah.
stories. Hey guys, just want to take a quick second here and thank some of the supporters of the podcast. First up, Poseidon Bicycles has been a supporter of this community, and I like to thank them. These guys specialize in making some of the best gravel bikes, all under $1,000, which allow me to explore any campsite that we pull into or my local trails. And it's such a great thing to be able to pull up, hit the road on a nice bike, and get to see more of the spots that you would normally see from just the campground. What makes these bikes even better is that they're super durable. They come shipped to your door almost assembled, and they're price point friendly. These things are perfect. So I'd recommend checking out Poseidon Bicycles if you're looking to get into mountain biking or gravel biking. They make some great bikes. Exactly. When I think of you with your YouTube or your Instagram following, your videos that you make, uh, just the stuff you make in general, it's a really cool reminder of the power that we have as just people to make and create things that we think are necessary for our life. And I just want to touch on your creative approach, how you got started with social media and making those awesome videos that have attracted so many followers to kind
Mm,
of make all those things you make. It's incredible.
yeah, I never had any social media prior to Instagram. I didn't have a MySpace page I didn't have a Facebook, and I wasn't. I just never been really into technology. Like you say, I've been real hands-on with stuff. When I started shaping full time again, after my dad passed away in 2012, I had been shaping surfboards and building stuff my whole life, but the shaping for a good portion of my life was a part-time gig I do in the evenings to supplement income. And in 2012, I started doing it full time. And surf magazines, which were the dialect that the surf industry spoke in, were going away because of social media, primarily Instagram. And I realized that pretty quickly I was going to need to uh, hop on board with that if I was going to continue making a living doing what I'm doing. And I don't really working in a surf shop. I worked in them for a lot of years, and I didn't particularly like the flavor of just the overall flavor of working in a surfboard factory. So I work right here at my house. I'm in my shop. It's underneath my house. And I thought I got to get the word out what I'm doing. And so Instagram made sense. And I remember when I started or pulled up the app, loaded it on my phone, I thought to myself, I don't want to put anything out there. I was seeing people put up photos and it was really common to use filters back then and make your photos look cool. And I just thought, I don't want to put anything out that is going to feel like it's work to live up to. I chose right from the get go to just be authentic with what I'm doing and just show the real thing. If it means showing some mistakes, those are things that are related. We're human and we're not perfect. And so it's cool to kind of just be that way. And I think people relate to it. And, and I think doing what I'm doing inspires people. So I think it's good to inspire people. And yeah, it's so far so good. It's worked out.
Yeah, that's amazing, especially when you think of like shaping, you think of old school, traditional people that maybe aren't as receptive to change as,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, someone that works in tech or just some different industry.
Yeah.
So for you to realize, and I remember that time, and I remember that was a big deal. Um,
Yeah.
but for you to look at this new thing and embrace it instead of shun away from it, that's pretty incredible to have that uh, mindset to be open to that. And you fast forward to where you're at now. I mean, your videos are amazingly produced. So how did you develop your skills along the way?
Yeah. I get pretty frustrated real quick on a computer. And so I, I just stuck with my phone. And I, for a, I, at first, initially, Instagram was just photos. And then I saw that video was starting to become more of a thing. And so I started taking more video but it was boring to just sit there and watch some one clip of video that did, I wanted to show a whole bunch of process, and I thought that it would be good to include sound. So the time lapse feature, that's a kind of you're cheating, I think, using that. I use it still, but I would just take the interesting parts of building a surfboard, catch those on video, and then just dump them all into iMovie, and then just chop the little cool parts out of it. And sometimes the cool parts are the mistakes or
Sure.
blowing it. And then there's a voiceover feature on there, and my iPhone has a case with a magnet on the back, and so I just stick it on I have a little tripod stand. I just stick it on, and it's hands free. I press record, and it's easy. I don't spend much time editing in, I just do a voiceover. I hardly ever do more than maybe one or two or maybe three takes on the voiceover, and throw a little music to it, lower that down, make sure the music matches the vibe, and
Sure.
yeah, it's just
It's
quick.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Super fun. That's cool. And it's really shed a light on all the things you've created, and like your Etsy store, obviously your shaping, and more recently your truck camper, which we'll get into in a second. But just recording that process, I know it can be difficult, but it's cool to see.
Yeah, I think that the difficult part for it doesn't feel difficult for me, but I think if there was something that's difficult, and I think probably for most people, the difficulty is in the head. It's, oh, is this gonna look right? Or they overthink it. And years ago, I just decided to get over paralysis by analysis and just do it.
Love that. Totally agree. At the time, like before the cream puff, you were obviously in the workshop making, and I think you had a solid following. I think I was following you at that point. But the decision to take on this camper that is now somewhat famous on social media, did you see a pivot in your followership when you decided to start recording that process? I'm just curious if that kind of opened up a different world, or if you already had kind of one foot in like the camping recreational world at that point.
I had so I have two Tacomas,
Okay.
and I have a 2000 first gen Tacoma, and I had an ARE camper shell on it. That truck came to me with 300,000 miles on it. A friend of mine gave it to me. He gave it to me because it wouldn't pass smog. It was running on three cylinders. It was completely hammered. Driven to Costa Rica, Alaska, all over the country. Had been to the tip, Cabo, I don't know, countless times. And he just beat the heck out of the truck. And I put a head gasket on it, got it smogged, kind of, sort of got it, yeah, running again. And that was our camping rig and going to Baja. So I've got 408,000 miles on that truck now. So my wife and I were
Nice.
camping in that. I'd always tent camped up until then. And my kids were grown and moved out, both my girls, and so it was just my wife and I. So I built a bed inside there, storage underneath it. A lot of people would do that little platform,
Hmm.
and we camped for a number of years out of that truck. Um, and so I would document our trips to Mexico, going down, surfing, fishing, diving, and that truck was part of that truck that's known as the Nun, which is short for the Flying Nun. And
Okay.
maybe I'll shoot you a photo of the Flying Nun when it got its name. I the not only was the truck hammered, but the ARE shell was hammered too, and the top, it was leaking, and so I cut the top of the shell off, and then I put a new top on with eaves, like a house would have eaves, to keep
Sure.
the rain off the side of the house and the windows. And so what by putting eaves on the truck and an overhang off the back so that you could sit on the tailgate out of the rain, it didn't leak anymore, but it looked like the Flying Nun. So my wife's friend nicknamed it that. So
Nice.
I'm going on and on now. Let's see. So that was the first truck.
Yeah.
My wife and I were on probably the 15th Baja trip in the Flying Nun, and we were in a very remote section of Baja on the Cortez side
Okay.
in the wintertime, and we had a north wind blowing, and it was freezing cold. It was blowing 50 plus, and this was a super rad place. So we couldn't do anything. We couldn't fish. We couldn't. I mean, it was miserable. You go outside, you get your skin ripped off you from the sand. So we're laying in the back like mid afternoon in the truck in the back. We can't sit up and read a book or anything. We're like, and we just started laughing. What are we doing here? And I go, and we had recently got a new truck. The same guy I got the Nun from had beat up another Tacoma to the point where he was over it. And so it was a 2007. And
This
so
is a
we
good guy to
bought that.
know.
Yeah, we bought that truck from him. Got a good deal on it. And I fixed that truck up. But it was a much newer truck, and it was nicer. And I wanted my wife to have the nice car. So that was her truck. And I was laying in the bed of the Nun with her, and I go, I could build a really cool camper for your truck. And she was like, oh, I'm not having this, because she wasn't a fan of the eaves on the Flying Nun. And I said, no, I can. If you would go with me here and you'd allow me the time, and I think I could build a sexy looking camper for your truck. And she goes, it has to look good. I go, I can do that. I build surfboards. Like you know, I could build a cool camper out of foam and surfboard materials and all that, shape a camper. And it could be one that we came up with kind of a list of things that were priorities to us. One of them was to have a queen size bed. The Nun didn't have a full 6 feet in the bed with the shell camper closed, so you get bugs, it's cold, whatever. My feet were hitting it was just miserable. So I said we wanted to have a full size bed, queen size, that was made. We could just have it made all the time. Didn't have to make it. We wanted to have a nice place to sit inside, out of the wind, comfortable, read a book. My wife likes to knit, away from the bugs. And then wanted to be able to have a nice place to cook a meal out of the wind. Spent a lot of time in Baja. It's windy in Baja a lot. So wanted to be able to cook inside and be able to stand up in there while we're doing so. So that was the genesis of the cream puff. And that was in December of 2000. I think it was 2020. It was, yeah. I started building the cream puff on April 15th, tax day of the next year.
And obviously you had these things that you needed in this new rig, like you said, the indoor cooking, the be able to, stand up. Were you looking at any other campers at that time for like inspiration? Because your design is pretty unique. I don't think I've seen a hard-sided wedge pop-up style. So I guess where were you drawing inspiration? Or did you just think of it and go, this will work?
When I was in high school, I went camping with a friend of mine who borrowed. I recently found out that he stole the truck from his brother for the weekend. But a friend of mine, we went up to Halama and we went surf fishing in Halama, and his brother's truck was an old Dodge, and he had an Alaskan pop-up camper on the back. And Halama's a windy place, and gosh, it was so cold. It was so windy. It was, once again, like sandblast you on the beach. And we got done with doing our stuff for the day, and we got inside that camper, and you could stand up in there, and it was had some wood. It was cozy inside. And I went, this is where it's at. And so I never forgot that experience of being in that old Alaskan camper. And so that was really the inspiration. I looked at the Tacoma as a weak truck. I mean, it's not really a truck. It's a car with a bed. They're just don't really made to carry a lot of weight, but they're really good for what I like to do. I like to be able to drive in super soft sand on the beach in Baja. And so the Tacoma is perfect for that. It's lightweight. They're great off-road. Four-wheel drive is great on them. So I thought, I got to have a lightweight camper with all those amenities on this Tacoma. I'm going to have to build it out of surfboard materials, foam and fiberglass, and build it super light. And couldn't put a Alaskan, camper on it. Mm-hmm. And I looked at Scout campers.
That's kind of right when they were starting.
Yeah, I looked at those, and I liked it, but I didn't want it to be that tall. I wanted to be able to put my kayak up on top and surfboards, stuff like that. Ultimately, I haven't been able to do that with this camper. I didn't meet that priority, but I looked at four-wheel pop-ups. They're great campers. Ultimately, I didn't want a canvas-sided one because we don't mind camping in some weather, and I didn't want to be popping up and pulling down a fabric-sided camper in the wet and having to worry about it molding and stuff like that. Not to mention the Scout and the four-wheel pop-ups they're just still a little bit more weight than I wanted to deal with, because while empty, they were okay. For the Tacoma, I could deal with it. Once I brought all the stuff I wanted to bring, it was just going to be too heavy.
Yeah. So ultimately, you're just like, all right, I'm going to bite the bullet and make my own.
Yeah, I had in my mind an idea for how it would pop up. I was going to originally make it all pop up from all four corners straight up. My Uncle Mickey, I was talking to him about the design, and he was like, you don't need it to pop all the way up on four sides. He goes, hinge it on the front. It'll be way stronger, and it'll be simpler design, and you only need to stand up in the back. And oh, that's brilliant. So he had a hand in some of the design evolution it was just in my head, and I started drawing some pictures, and I drew pictures of it, and then I would take the better pictures and I'd show my wife, and I would gauge the first 5 seconds of her facial expression on whether or not this was good or to go back to the drawing board. So eventually I gave her a drawing, and I could tell immediately she liked it, but then it changed to, I don't know if he can build, I think she was thinking in her head, I don't know if he can build this, but I was like, oh, okay, I like a challenge. So I landed on a good drawing, and then I went from there.
And obviously the build is well documented using, is it EPS foam and flax fiberglass, or is it
Yeah,
polyurethane foam?
no, it's EPS foam. US Blanks, when they cut surfboard blanks out of EPS, they buy these big rectangular blocks of
Yeah.
EPS foam, and they hot wire cut the surfboard blanks out of those blocks. And when they get to the bottom, um, think of kind of a really flat, squashed skateboard half pipe. It's just, you've got the bottom rocker of the last blank, but then it's thick on the ends, but then it tapers down to maybe 2.5 inches or something, and they can't cut another blank out of that. So they would just send those bottom pieces off to get recycled. And so I asked Jeff up there at US Blanks, I said, hey, can you save those bottom pieces for me and just hot wire cut them off at 1.7 inches thick? And just when you get done with them, just keep saving those for me. I don't know, I forget how many of them I needed. I got, I don't know, 6 or 7 of them from him. And so I made them out of literally the foam that they use to cut surfboard blanks out of. And then Colin Australia weaves flat. So there's people get interested in alternative materials that are more maybe green for building surfboards. So I had been introduced to flax cloth. It's a plant fiber. The flax is a plant, and it's basically linen. And they weave essentially the equivalent of 4-ounce fiberglass cloth. They weave a flax cloth that's that equivalent for surfboards. So I got some of that from them, and I laminated the camper with Green Rim epoxy. Green Rim makes a blend of epoxy that uses part of the petroleum-based solids that are in the normal epoxy. They replace them with a plant-based one. So I wouldn't say it's like fully green, but it's basically the greenest epoxy we know how to make right now. And EPS foam technically is recyclable. I don't think anybody's going to recycle the cream puff camper, but yeah, right. So I just tried to do it cheap and green friendly, and it was a pain in the neck. I built the whole thing in my driveway, laminating leaves and flies, bugs, dirt into the flax cloth out in my driveway in the sun and cold wind. It wasn't easy to do, but yeah, it was fun.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so cool. I don't know your living situation. I'm assuming it's like in a residential area with
Yep.
neighbors and in a street and stuff. Muscling these long panels out to your driveway. Did you have to run the planer over them to smooth them out? Were they smooth? What was the finish work before the glass work? And was it creating dust? And what was this commotion like? I'm just curious.
Yeah. EPS foam is a mess because it's light and it blows around in the wind. And if you start working on it, it gets everywhere. The vast majority of the cutting and the working with the foam, I did inside my shaping room where I'm at here now. I have a dust collection system in here, so I'm able to pull all of that dust and capture that. So I wasn't doing that outside. The laminating part, the pieces that were too big or that I couldn't laminate in here in my room, I would laminate in the driveway, but that wasn't creating any dust. And the epoxy doesn't smell. There's no VOC going on, so nobody was smelling anything. And then there was a couple points where I ran the planer out of my driveway once pieces were too big, but I used a Makita, and I have a Makita dust collection system that hooks up wirelessly. It's really cool to the planer, and it's pretty doggone dust free. It was cool. There was almost some accidents in front of my house. There was people that would regularly drive by and take photos. I worked on it over the course of 3 months or so, and yeah, people that because they didn't know what I was doing. What's he building, a boat or? Yeah, it was funny. This neighborhood's cool though. There's a lot of people that build stuff and they're dry. There's no association here. You can do whatever you want for the most. Be polite to your neighbors,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Guys, I just want to share a trick and tip I've learned along the way in my small truck campers adventure. Obviously, there's a lot of solutions to secure your truck camper to your truck bed, and I think I've tried them all. I've tried the bed-mounted stakes. I've tried the ones that clamp onto the bed rail. I've even tried ratchet ties, and most recently, I've tried a bed mount system where you have to drill about 10 holes into your truck bed and attach a bar which you can attach the camper to. All of these solutions, although they got me from point A to point B, they either damaged my truck bed, damaged my camper, or damaged my truck in some way or another. When you have to secure the camper to the truck, it's one of those solutions where you just got to do it right the first time. And my biggest regret is not getting a torque lift tie down system for my truck. These are the most secure systems. They offer the most minimal way to attach them, oftentimes no drilling at all. And it secures the camper to the truck via the frame. Your camper is not going to sway side to side. It'll help with cornering and maneuvering, and it'll give you the peace of mind when you're driving down the road that your camper is not going to fly off with everything in it that you own. I want to spread that message because, like I said, if you don't do it right the first time, you risk damaging your truck bed or your truck bed camper. For the listeners that maybe haven't seen it or haven't seen it recently, for myself as well, it sits on the bed rails, right? It's not like a full box and camper.
No, it's a full. Yeah, it's not a slide in because I built like a bed liner out of. I used 5/16 marine ply, Baltic birch ply, and I made basically like a drop-in bed liner, but out of that really thin plywood, and that is held into the bed by the factory rails on the second gen Tacoma. It has these rails around the inside, so I have that's bolted into the bed there, and then the rest of the entire camper, it's all built out of foam with a little bit of wood structure incorporated where I needed some wood backing and for structure and strength. That then it sits on the bed rails, but it's actually bolted to those side rails. It has an L-shaped bracket that I made out of aluminum. So the rails of the bed don't support very much of the weight. It's mostly those factory rails on the inside. And so the one of the reasons why the guy that I bought the truck from got rid of it is he had a Callan camper that sat on the bed rails and he'd already crushed the bed. A lot of people have had that problem. It'll crush the sheet metal on the, so it's not very strong. So I try to avoid putting a lot of weight on the rails. So I would call it's a full built out camper. You don't see any of the truck bed when you step into it.
Yeah. So it's like a hybrid, but that's interesting about the bed rails. I never really realized that with that. It's just sheet metal vertical, so it can't really stand a lot of weight, you know?
Yeah, it's a composite bed inside. It's plastic. It's some kind of plastic, and then it's just a sheet metal skin on the outside of the fenders. But then Toyota incorporated this like kind of like a C-channel rail around the inside that you can tie your motorcycle or tie down loads to. They have different accessories that I just use that as my support structure to hold the camper to the truck. Essentially, the camper's in three pieces. It's a bed liner, the walls, the back, the walls, the cab over is all one part, and then I have a cap that goes over the top of that, and that's what tilts up and down.
I see. And does it live on your wife's truck full time, or you take it off and on as you need?
No, it lives on it full time, and it would be a pain in the neck to pull it off. Mostly because you can't slide it out. You'd have to pick it all the way up, and besides that, I like it so much I've already buried all the fixtures and stuff. I'd have to do some surgery on it to get it out. I could, but it's my goal was to have it be about 500 pounds. The shell of it to be that, and I weighed each piece when I put it together, and I figured that I was about 480 pounds of material on the truck before I put anything in it. So that was with windows in the back door. So, realistically, I'm probably 1,000 pounds, 1,100 pounds or so on the back of the truck the first trip we took in the truck was from here to up to the Canadian border. We went up to Olympic National Park and up and down the coast and on the completely stock Toyota suspension. And
So
it
no
was okay on the
airbags,
highway.
no springs,
No
no
airbags,
extra
nothing.
springs. Yeah.
No extra springs, nothing. Stock shocks. And it was okay. It didn't bottom out on the freeway unless you hit like a real big bump on the freeway. If you were driving aggressive, I could feel the back end bottom out, hit the bump stops. But it was pretty good, but it wasn't going to be good for Baja. And you had to be pretty ginger off road with it. I've upgraded the suspension since then.
And how's it performed? Do you plan on keeping it, or do you plan on making a V2?
I love the process.
Mm-hmm.
When I have a finished product, surfboard, I'm like, yeah, I get to start another one. I did a little remodel on it. I haven't really changed a whole lot on the camper, but I did do a little remodel in the kitchen. I was a little over ambitious with the size of fridge freezer that I put in it. I realized pretty quickly I didn't need an 80 quart capacity or liter or whatever they call it. I don't know. I think it was an 80 quart Dometic. And I realized pretty quickly that my wife and I really probably only needed about 50. And I could change the configuration inside by putting the fridge freezer against the back wall rather than on the side. And it gave me more leg room. It just made it a little more user friendly. So about a year ago, I did a little remodel on the kitchen part of it. But I debated originally pulling the bed on the truck and just building an entirely from scratch camper mounted right to the frame. I didn't do that because I had a time frame that I wanted to stick to. And I also felt, hey, what if I want to sell this camper down the road? It might be a little more relatable to people if it just fits right in the stock Tacoma bed. And so between those two decisions or thoughts in my head, I just decided to keep the bed. I'm real tempted to ditch this camper and pull the bed off and start from scratch. Mostly because I would like it to be lighter than it is now. And I think if I ditch the bed, I can probably shave 200 pounds off the whole package and I can gain quite a bit more real estate inside storage. And it's been floating around my head for a little while.
Yeah, dreaming and scheming of what can
Sure,
be.
sure.
Yeah.
I really like having a truck
Mhm.
based camper just because there's places there's a beach. So I told you I wanted a queen size bed, a nice place to sit, and a kitchen to stand up in.
Yeah.
There was one more requirement, and then it had to get down to this beach that was one of my wife and I's favorite places to camp in Baja, and it's a steep sand dune. You literally just the first time I took her there, I'd been there before, and when I took her there, she goes, "You're not driving down there," and I go, "Watch this!" Whew! I went right over the edge down there, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, we're staying here forever. We're never going to get out of here." And I go, "No, we can get out of here." And so the cream puff had to be able to drive back out of that beach, and it's a dicey deal. You could leave a car down there if it wasn't the right vehicle. The cream puff has no problem getting out of there,
Wow.
but you could not drive a van down there. You couldn't. It'd be tough to drive a full size truck down there. It's just too heavy.
That's wild. That's cool though.
Yeah,
It's good to have those parameters when you're figuring out what rig is right for you, you know?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And maybe your friend will buy a Tundra or F-250 and beat the hell out of it, sell it to you for cheap with a broken head gasket, can't pass smog, and then we can go on V3 or V4 or whatever.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. A first gen Tundra would be pretty sweet to build a rig on. That's for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. Yep.
Well, you'd have no shortage of people willing to give up their truck for you to throw a camper on one of those things because
Oh yeah, I know.
pretty
I
popular
would.
still.
First gen Tundra that'd be a really good rig to build one on. So
Yeah, agreed.
yeah.
So prior to the cream puff and that whole endeavor, you had a lot of I don't know, a lot of momentum in the surf world and with your
Hmm.
makings and stuff. Did
Yep.
making this camper open up new doors to either opportunities or partnerships or just things that you wouldn't have normally been opened up to, stepping into that overland world, I guess?
Yeah, I've the surf world and the brands that are within the surf world, I find it limiting. And because of where I live around here, a lot of the brands in the surf world are based in Southern California, or they're all on the coast. They're immersed in the culture, and they're because they're so saturated with it, they're just not. They don't get excited about stuff. And so I found that working with brands outside of the surf world, they're interested in what I do and how I build surfboards. There's a lot more excitement, so it's fun to work with brands outside of the surf industry. I've had a long-term relationship with Carhartt that came through the surf industry, but they enjoy the content that I produce because I do work with my hands. I work with hand tools. Most of the tools that I use are tools that tradesmen use, carpenters and plumbers and electricians. And so it's relatable to people away from the coast. They're, wow, he's using a tool that I use to build surfboards. That's interesting. So it captures people's attention, it inspires them. The overland community, while some of them surf, a lot of them don't. And I actually enjoy doing a lot of the things that they like doing. Like I, if you gave me the choice to go to Mexico with some good surf or a good time of year with some beautiful weather in Utah, I could flip a coin and be happy with either decision. I mean, I love going out to Utah and exploring, and it could be, I just like going outside of where I live and going checking stuff out. I think it's good to get outside of the surf industry. It helps keep me motivated. I get inspired by looking at what other people do outside of, my primary focus is building surfboards. That while it's interesting to me, I like to learn new stuff. And so I like to be inspired by other people.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. That's a really good point. And I've been thinking a lot about this too recently, especially with a 6 month old and not being able to surf as much. Like what's the big picture here? Is it surfing or is it adventuring? Is that like the big
Mm-hmm.
umbrella? And you can surf,
Mm-hmm.
you can go mountain bike, you can fish, you can go camping, you can go hiking. So capturing all those things, redefining what is the mission here. And yeah, I agree. I agree. There's a lot of good inspiration outside of the surf industry, a lot more relatable. And also, there's more money and there's more people. So you have opportunity to do things that, high fives are common in the surf industry, but maybe more product placement outside of the surf industry is more of a accurate compensation or something. So I think there's a lot more room for
Yeah.
partnerships outside of the surf industry and a lot more room for innovation and just different people. It's cool to meet different people from different walks of life.
Yeah. Total 100%. One of my best friends, he just lives, breathes, eats surfing. And I like to go to Baja with him, he and his wife, and my wife and I will go down there. And he'll think about the trip from the moment we plan it. And all he thinks about is how big is the surf going to be and how perfect is it going to be the whole time leading up to the trip. And he is almost 100% batting 100% being disappointed in the surf. And so we'll spend the first day or two, he'll be bummed, and then finally he'll go, man, Josh is super stoked over here catching fish off those rocks. And the fish tacos last night were super good. And pretty soon he's fishing with me. And at the end of the trip, he's, that was the best surf trip I ever didn't surf on. And there's more than just riding a wave.
Yeah. Going back to your dad's kind of outlook on it, it's more than just riding the waves. It's the
Yeah.
process. It's what are you going to bring? Who are you going to go with?
Yeah.
What are you going to
Sure.
do when it's flat? Are we going to dirt bike? Are we going to fish?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
really cool. Do you have any plans to attend like an expo this year where people can come meet you, whether it's in the surf world or the camping world, or attend certain events, or are you pretty content down there near the beach in Southern California?
I had an opportunity to build a couple surfboards for a couple different brands that were at the Overland Expo up in Flagstaff, Arizona. This was back when I was still driving the Flying Nun, and I had to deliver the surfboards to these both the people that I was working with and building the boards for. They were pretty happening brands at the expo, and so I had to drive down one of the aisles the night before the expo started in the Flying Nun with these two surfboards, and I mean The Nun is a first gen. It's a 2000 first gen Tacoma, and it's beat up bad.
Yeah.
Like it's dented all. And I just remember driving. My wife was humiliated. She's, oh my gosh, there's Unimog this and G wagon over there, and there's this crazy rig, and there's all these polished, fancy, And we're driving through, and people just kept looking at the Tacoma and the Nun, and they just kept going, "Oh, that's a sick truck." I'm like, hey, we're okay. We don't fit in, but everybody's, yeah, we do. So
Yeah, we
anyway,
fit in.
we spent the next day walking around the Overland Expo, and that's the only one I've ever been to. I think I was about probably 6 years ago, and it was super fun. I'd love to go back and spend some time at one of the Overland Expos. I don't have any plans this year to go to any of them. I'm headed off to France in a week and a half to go over there and shape surfboards. And I usually go over there once a year to shape. And this time they're opening up a new facility. So I'm going to be there to just demonstrate shaping, get people into the shaping bay, work on boards. It's been really fun to work with them over there. There's been some opportunities to work with, like Louis Vuitton, for instance. Talk about being outside the surf industry. I got to build a board for them, one of their shops, and so some of them are going to be there at this event, and I
Whoa.
get to bring them into the shaping bay. And oh, talk about inspiring people. Those people, man, they are talented. Super fun. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
that's super
don't
cool.
yeah, I don't have. I'm trying to think if I have any other plans to attend anything. That's all that's on the radar at the moment, but I'm always
Mhm.
open to it. So
Cool. And I think,
yeah,
France is like the Mecca, right? Or not the Mecca, but it's like the pilgrimage that a lot of shapers have to get to make. Uh,
yeah,
I've
yep,
just known
yep.
so many shapers over the years that go to France for a few months and maybe go to Japan for a month and then come back to California and
Yeah, and what happens is the surf culture is really small there, and so
yeah,
people aren't immersed in it, and so you go over there and everything's new and exciting, and it's really fun to work over there. It's great, really passionate people, super friendly. I love where I work over there. It's a it's in and around the area of La Rochelle. It's north of Biarritz. It's up a kind of central Atlantic coast there. It reminds me a lot of the central coast of California, Morro Bay, San Luis Obispo, Rio Grande, Nipomo, Santa Maria, that kind of area. It feels like that. And I like it up there.
yeah, it's right up your alley for sure.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I'll be sure to link below so people can, if they're not already following along, check out your Instagram, check out your videos, and keep being inspired by what you're making. So thanks so much for all you've done to the community and your willingness to be patient, make videos, and really inspire others. It's awesome to see. I can't thank you enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. And thanks for putting out the content you do, because all the big full size, $300,000 rigs, they're not attainable. They're hard to relate to. And the stuff that you put out, I relate to. I'm always more interested in it. So,
I
thanks.
appreciate that. Yeah, and
Woo.
I agree completely. Awesome, Josh. Well, I'll let you get back to planning for France or planning V2, whatever you got going on today.
Yeah.
But thanks
All right.
again.